Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. My name's Jake Wilson and this video is all about tuning on the electric guitar. Now, this is a slightly more complicated subject than maybe most people even realise. So as a professional guitarist, I spend a lot of my time tuning instruments. How much time exactly? Who knows? But it's a lot of time tweaking and getting things right. So over the years, I've refined the way I tune instruments and it's something I take quite seriously. I just thought I'd pass on the information, as some of it is far from obvious. So first off, I guess we have to deal with the philosophical issue of what is in tune. Again, not straightforward. Maybe this isn't the video for this particular subject, as it is quite in-depth. There are a lot of things about tuning systems, physics, equal temperament, all that. We'll come back to a few aspects of that as we go, but I really recommend that you just go and do some research on this on Wikipedia or something. But this video is all about that feeling we get when everything is in tune and the whole instrument is singing, everything sounds amazing. We all know what that feeling is, or most of us will know what that feeling is, apart from the very small percentage of people who are tone deaf. Yeah, I don't know anything about that, but anyway. But we all know what that feeling's like, and that experience, and just how everything is in harmony. That's what we're going to be looking at. We're going to try not to get sort of bogged down in discussions of equal temperament, and so on and so on and so on. So one of the things I've found is that as I've got more experience, the more discriminating I get about pitch and about tuning. And I expect this will happen to you too. Maybe if you're just starting out, you'll just sort of gradually grow more accustomed to what things should sound like. And that's a really good place to get to. So anyway, without further ado, here are my 9 pro tuning tips. So tip number 1 is to maintain your instrument. This is really important to your tuning, as obviously everything is connected to how the instrument is actually operating. So this means things like change your strings properly, set your intonation well, make sure your truss rod's in the right place, make sure your tuning heads, these things, make sure they actually work. There are some really bad tuning heads out there that just are going to give you a bad time. And when you start to notice that tuning becomes difficult, change your strings, use lubricant on things like your nut, underneath your string tree, any of the kind of moving parts. You may wish to use lubricant to stop things sticking in it, just to help you get things more accurate and more consistent. I highly recommend doing that. Some people use pencil graphite or whatever. Look, I'm not a tech, I'm not a guitar tech, so I'm not the best person to go to for this information. But I recommend you really study just how important all of this stuff is and how to do these kinds of things on your own instrument. It's really valuable knowledge and can help you if you're, say, on the road and there's not a tech nearby, or if something's just happened at home and you need to do something that evening. Also, make sure you stretch your strings properly. This is something that a lot of people chicken out on and they don't really go for it. You'll get 1 or 2 string snaps occasionally, but most of the time you'll be fine, and just stretch it and stretch it and stretch it until it no longer wavers in pitch. You can do this as well right at the bridge, and any point at which you feel that the string needs to be stretched, stretch it there. I would also recommend that you watch your pickup height. This is a really subtle thing, but sometimes, and I'm not even sure this affects pitch that much, but it definitely affects the sort of the centering of that pitch because of any sort of tonal wobble. You can get some nasty kind of, some people call them wolf tones, when your pickups are too close to the string and they're setting off all kinds of horrid harmonics. So you want to avoid that if at all possible. You should also be aware that if you change tunings, go down a drop D or do something crazy and alternate, you need to set your intonation to match that. That's why a lot of touring professionals tend to have guitars that are just set up for those tunings if they're required. But obviously that's a luxury that not many of us have. So number 2 is quite commonly known, but I thought I'd put it in anyway, and that's to tune up to pitch. For some reason, slackening off the string to get to your pitch just causes some mischief with your guitar. If you can succinctly explain why that happens, if you could leave a comment, that'd be really interesting for me. Thank you. So number 3 is to be aware that the tuning of each string affects the tuning of each other string. Now this affects floating bridges more than it affects fixed bridges, but it still has an effect. So I have this bad habit where I start at the high E and tune down to the low E. I've just always done it that way, but it makes much more sense to start tuning from the lowest string. So tuning that lowest string is going to have a much more drastic effect on the other strings, or the tension and the tuning of the other strings. So it makes sense to maybe not tune just once through, but to start at the bottom and tune twice. Now, my thing, I've started at the top, just maybe it's my ears or something, but then I get to the bottom and I make sure I tune from the bottom all the way up to the top strings. Now, you could get a TC Electronic polytune and play all of the strings at once. So I find that really useful for finding out what effect tuning one string has on the other strings. So tip number 4, and I can already feel the controversy about this, but I would recommend that you use a strobe tuner. So getting that strobe to come to a still point, I absolutely know that that pitch is in tune. Sometimes with the kind of needle tuners or the bubble tuners, you can sometimes find that they wiggle around a bit, and I'm not really ever sure what that is doing. So I think the needle tuner and the bubble tuner might be slightly quicker to operate. That might be a consideration if you've got to tune very, very quickly. But just on a personal preference, yeah, strobe just seems to be more accurate. So number 5, again, is a kind of obvious one, but it's really important to give your tuner a clean signal. If you have delays or choruses or anything that goes in before it, then you're going to have a tough time, and it's not going to be measuring what you're doing that accurately. So I'd really recommend that you just go straight into your tuner. Now this also affects clip-on tuners to some degree, because if you're in a particularly noisy environment, that tuner is going to pick up all that other information. Clip-on tuners, I find, are great for convenience, but they aren't always that reliable when you're in a noisy room. So I've been in some situations where I'm tuning and other people are tuning, and all I've got is a clip-on tuner, and it just takes so long, it's not really getting an accurate reading. If you're in a quiet room, they're fine. But yeah, I would really recommend that you just give your tuner a chance and give it a nice clean signal. Number 6 is a much more subtle thing, and it's to be aware of the forces you're applying to your instrument. Don't expose the neck to gravity, for example. If you're doing this, the force downwards when you're tuning, if you're leaning down over your tuner and tuning and then sitting back up, there's a chance that everything's going to be a little bit out of whack. Don't push down when you're tuning. It's something I see a fair bit. When you're tuning, just let the string settle for a bit and let go of the tuning head to check that it's actually accurate when no pressure is being applied here. Sometimes just a pinch or a push can really change the precision of that tuning. This is particularly important with big chunky bass guitars. Obviously this is a lot of mass. If I do this, a lot of weight is going down this way. And when I was doing a show a couple of years ago, I kind of kept to notice that the tuning wasn't quite perfect, not on an older bass. And what I was just finding was that I was tuning leaning down ever so slightly and then playing sitting back. So by doing that, the tuning was kind of going back and forth depending on whether I was back or forward, and it was a bit of a mess. So you have to kind of tune in the playing position. 7 is to optimize tunings when appropriate. Again, this is a slightly subtle point, but I think it needs mentioning. If you're in a studio where precision is absolutely essential and you're playing in a certain key, or there's a certain part of the song that's just not singing, it's not, harmonious in the way that you want, or there's like a piano part and there's a bit of rub going on, it might be appropriate to tune your guitar to that key or to the most commonly used notes, and not going with the compromise of tuning the open strings. Now you have to remember that the guitar, with conventional frets and conventional hardware, yes, I know there are ever-tuned bridges and true temperament frets, but the vast majority of people don't use those yet. You have to remember that the guitar is always out of tune. It's a compromise. The tension on each string is different, so therefore the frets are going to be an approximation of pitch across the instrument. It's just the way things are. Even if you have the most perfectly set intonation, there are going to be some notes that are going to wave around a bit. Even the overtone series, the kind of tuning of nature, if you like, has a few notes that are kind of a bit flat. Anyway, I'm getting into tuning systems again. I promised I wasn't going to do that. Obviously, there are multiple tuning systems like equal temperament and stretch tuning, or even some guitarists who decide to sweeten or flatten some pitches. I know the Peterson clip-on tuners have different tuning settings that you can customize. I don't know whether you can customize them. I'm getting into tuning systems again. I promised I wasn't going to do that. So what I'm saying is that if you're playing and you tune your guitar conventionally and things just aren't singing right, just consider tuning to the note you're actually using. So I found that to be really helpful on a few occasions. But I think you have to use your ears for this stuff. I've even heard of people recording one chord at a time that's perfectly in tune just to get around that particular problem. And if that's appropriate, then sure, go ahead and do it. If you're going for something that's more vibey, maybe the other compromise is best for you. That's extreme, but if you think about it and you've got all these other MIDI instruments or pianos or whatever going on at the same time, you just kind of want to avoid that sort of rubbing of very close but not exact pitches if that's bothering you. For other applications, it's entirely appropriate to stick to conventional tuning and just be happy with that compromise, particularly if you don't have time to keep changing tunings for each chord and stuff like that. So for example, you might be playing a tune and always find that there's one chord that just never really sings. Just try tuning before you play, just try tuning to that chord. Obviously check the other chords, but just see if that makes a difference. It's something I found really helps actually. So tip number 8 is to check your tuning at every available opportunity. So this is whether you're playing live or before every take, between songs, just keep checking it, stay on top of it. Use your ears if possible. Again, just check the chords that they're really singing. It might drive you a bit crazy, but it's really worth it. And like I said at the beginning, when things are really singing, everything's much better. One thing I'll say quickly though is that when you're tuning, just keep an eye on the letter. Most tuners will tell you which note name you're playing, and that will just stop you maybe leaving things in drop D when you're meant to be tuning them back up to E. I have made this mistake. And finally, tip number 9 in this slightly dry video is to check your technique. So things like overpressure and hitting the guitar too hard can cause pitch problems, usually making things a bit sharp. Sometimes when you're fretting, just be sure that you're not bending the string either way without really meaning to. This happens a lot with chord playing, and it's something that your left hand just takes a while to get used to, especially if you're not a very experienced player. But I'm sure for most of you, this won't be a problem at all. Sometimes a problem for me, but at this stage I'm a little bit sort of more aware of when it's happening. It's usually just down to maybe just being a bit lazy with the technique. It's quite possible that your guitar's absolutely in tune, but if your vibrato is always hovering above the pitch rather than coming kind of back down to it, especially if you stop the note and you're still up above it, that can make your guitar sound horrendously out of tune. So those were my 9 tips to better tuning. I hope this has been useful for you. If it has, please subscribe, check out the other videos on my channel, but also go and check out my JTC products. There'll be a link to those in the description. Yeah, if you have any other interesting information about tuning related things, then please leave a comment. So thanks for watching my video about tuning your guitar. Hope it was helpful. Take it easy.